Here in Pennsylvania, we have had a cold streak, a lot lower than average, single digits, if not in the negatives. And I have been extremely lucky. We have not gotten a blizzard yet. And I say that because my snowshoes are in dire need of maintenance. So, snowshoes for me are only used a few times a year. Most of the snowfalls here in Pennsylvania we get are anywhere from 2 to 5 inches on average, but normally twice a year we get blizzards, and our blizzards range anywhere from 3 foot to 5 foot of snow. And at that time, it's very imperative that I wear a pair of snowshoes to get around, because otherwise travel outside is very, very difficult during that time. So I really don't get that much use out of snowshoes, but it's important that I have them and I understand how to use them. And I have these traditional style snowshoes, so they do require some maintenance, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The last time that I maintained these was actually 3 years ago. And like I said, I don't do a lot of snowshoeing. If you do a lot of snowshoeing, you're going to want to repair your snowshoes every year. If not halfway through the season, you're going to want to do some maintenance to them. But for me, I actually did let this go a little bit longer than I would need to. And we're going to talk about how I identify this in a second. But they're in dire need. So if it would snow and it would be a blizzard, I wouldn't take these out right now, because I would probably be close to doing some damage to them. Now, to identify when we actually need to maintain our snowshoes, we can look at two different things. Number one, we can look at the frames. So the wooden frames, when we look at those, we should see varnish on the wood. And it's very obvious, as you can tell right here, there's no varnish. The varnish is gone from that. So we don't want to continue to use these shoes without getting more varnish on them. The second telltale sign is by looking at the webbing. And number one, you can see the varnish coming off, but if you're ever using the snowshoes and you see something like this, or you see that the rawhide is actually getting wet, is when I first noticed it, that the rawhide was getting soft. It's very important at that point to stop using them, because if we break rawhide, then we have to look at relacing, which we don't ever want to have to do. So the first step in maintaining the snowshoes is going to be to sand them. And what we're looking to do at this point is get off any old varnish that is starting to flake or chip away, and any wood that has any imperfections, we want to smooth that out. So just lightly go over your entire snowshoe. I have 4 different grits of sandpaper here. I have 60 grit, I have 100 grit, I have 150 grit, and then 220 grit. The heavier 60 grit I'll use more on the frames for anywhere that is a little bit more beat up that I need to just really clean up. And then the other 3 grits I'll just work over the whole entire snowshoe itself, just to break off anything that's starting to flake or chip away, and we'll get ourselves a good base to work with. So that's the first step that we need to do. So again, guys, nothing overly complicated here. Heavier grit around the wood, and then if you need to, you could run some of that heavier grit, of course, across the lacing, but I like to just use a finer grit. I find it I don't need as much to sand on the lacing. So just work that edge, get it nice and clean, and then we'll go on to our next step. The varnish of choice for snowshoe maintenance is marine spar varnish. What we're going to do with this varnish now is we just take a basic paintbrush, open up the can, and we're going to paint our snowshoes. We're going to paint the wood rims, and we're going to paint all the lacings with it. Coats really are going to vary. If you're going to do this every year or throughout the season, maybe 2 coats per snowshoe. In my case, because I haven't done this for a while and I really gave this a good sanding, I'm going to shoot with just using an entire can on both shoes. And then once the can's used up, if I feel like I need any more, I'll open up a second can, because I did purchase 2 cans. But for now, I think 1 can should be enough. All we're going to do again is open this up and just start to paint this on the front and the back side. Very simple. I'm just going to paint a coat. Try not to have too much run on this. I have an old tarp underneath. I'm just going to take a little bit and start to paint it on. You can hear I have some drips, but that's okay. I'm going to put a couple coats on. We just don't want it to be uneven. We want a nice even coat of this throughout our entire shoe. So I'm going to do this on both, let them dry, and then flip them over. Okay, so hopefully you can see the major difference between this one here
that I have already stained. And this one over here, of course there's some white from the sanding and the sand dust, but look at the lacing itself, the difference in just the color. Now I went over this lacing very lightly with sandpaper, same here, but you can still tell this looks very rich and like a brand new snowshoe. That one super worn out.
2 days later, we are all finished our snowshoes. You can see how nice they look, all glossed up, protected, ready for miles of trail. I ended up using just one can. I do have 4 coats of that marine spar varnish on these, but that's going to give it a good long lasting protection. What you do need to remember when you're coating these is, of course, you don't need to go overboard with this, but because mine were in such bad shape in a sense, you want to get enough of that varnish on there that it protects it from the snow. And snow does have some grit to it, so it's going to wear it off. So just because the first coat looks good doesn't mean there's a thick enough layer on there to protect your lacing and your wood frames. So it's a very simple project. It just takes some time. This was Dan Wowak with Coalcracker Bushcraft. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, fix up your snowshoes, get them ready because the snow is going to be coming at some point. And as always, stay in the woods, guys.